Thanks, Julie.
The floor is yours.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this important and exciting meeting. And I'm sure you'll agree that David Willetts has just shown why he had a reputation for being one of the most intelligent and thoughtful ministers in government. I might have been writing his speech this morning. You've seen here that he's more than capable of writing his own, and probably doing a better job than I would. So I have to admit, I approached this speech with some nervousness, given that Tech UK has done such a great job in bringing together leading organisations and individuals working on the challenges and opportunities of 5G. I thought what I could offer is some insight into how we in government are trying to put the UK at the forefront of 5G innovation and to create an enabling environment for deployment of new technologies. The first challenge, I think, for us in government and governments more generally is to try to understand what 5G actually is. So at other meetings, I would probably open up with a nice little quip saying nobody knows what it is. Unfortunately, in this audience, I think we've got a number of people who've got a pretty good idea what 5G will be and indeed will play leading roles taking us from that vision to reality. And indeed, I'm going to be followed up by Raheem, who I know has a pretty good idea of what that is. But for governments at the moment, we're not sort of dealing with a fully established technology. We're grappling with a set of fairly broad requirements, and that's a different set of challenges. So it's fashionable in speeches and presentations on the development of wireless technologies to talk about exponential increases in data traffic. I'm looking straight out here at Simon Saunders, so whose work on exponential increases in data traffic is well known. So I've identified another recent trend, and that's the exponential increase in papers and research on wireless and 5G technology. Somebody very recently, very kindly forwarded me a paper I particularly like in that space by NTT Docomo, which for me provided, for this humble layman, well, more or less layman, includes an excellent description of the major trends that we're seeing in mobile services. I see you have Takahiro Nakamura from Docomo on a panel tomorrow, and I'm sure that'll be a fascinating panel. So the trends identified were everything is becoming connected by wireless technologies, and wireless services are providing a richer experience, typically but not exclusively, through video streaming. Those are sort of two very different complementary trends. They're developing in parallel, and they lead us to be able to draw some conclusions about the broad parameters of 5G services. So firstly, many more devices connected, and obviously we've referred to Internet of Things and so on. In any discussion of the Internet of Things, there's usually some reference to orders of magnitude increases in the numbers of connected devices, with most of the additional connections being wireless. I've seen estimates of 50 billion devices. I've seen estimates of 100 billion devices. I have no idea. We have, 5, 6, 7 billion devices connected today, but we can expect at least orders of magnitude more. And those devices are going to need to be connected over a much greater geographic area than at present. Alongside this, there will be extensive intermittent data, with many devices only linking occasionally, and that brings obviously other challenges, deployment of things that need very long battery lives, but only need to wake up every so often, so rather like government officials. Higher data rates will be needed to deliver the richer services I've referred to, and to ensure a uniform and higher quality of experience. And I think that's very often people talk about that sort of great experience of the it's a nice accessible sort of metaphor, is to say, well, you're going to be able to download a movie very, very quickly. But actually, there comes a point when how much quicker do you need to download a whole movie that you're going to watch over a period of 3 hours? Whether it's 1 second or 10 seconds matters very little, but you do want it to be high quality. You don't want to jump a crucial scene because you've had some packet loss and things like that. All this means networks will need to be more extensive, have significantly more capacity. So it's also likely we'll see significant shifts in technology and in the architecture of networks. We'll see a greater fusion in what we currently regard as the separate fixed, mobile and wireless networks. We mustn't forget about fixed networks when we think about 5G. Ultimately, the data has to go somewhere and has to come back to the core. In addition to technological developments and the standards that underpin them, there's the question of how and when these will be deployed. And I think we had a question about, is it, can you get out too far out in front? I tend to agree with David Willits that it's better to be out in front rather than, and maybe sometimes get it wrong, but have to adapt. The levels of investment required to introduce these changes are significant for communications providers, and how these investments are made and their timing, great interest not least to any government that wishes to maximise the benefits from a digital economy. I'll return to this point later. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go into other parameters that I'm sure you're going to talk about, such as lower latency, because that has sort of, other than the standard setting that David's already talked about, that's of sort of lesser importance to what government can offer. If you're going to increase the capacity of wireless networks, you're going to need some sort of combination of more spectrum and more sites for base stations, and that's where government does come in. So let me start with spectrum. If 5G is to develop in a way that offers an experience of always sufficient bandwidth for whatever the consumer wants to be doing, then significantly more spectrum is going to be required. But we're also going to need to use more and new approaches in spectrum management. In the UK, we've prided ourselves on being at the forefront of innovation in spectrum management amongst governments. In March this year, the Prime Minister, David Cameron, launched our UK spectrum strategy, as been referenced, at CeBIT in Germany. And the strategy sets out our vision for spectrum, including how we aim to support innovation. We aim to double the economic contribution of spectrum to the UK economy by 2025, and that's no mean feat, because we have already estimated that radio spectrum use contributes 50 billion per annum in economic surplus to the UK economy, so it's already an enormously significant contributor. So if we're going to do that, we need to release more spectrum into more economically valuable use. And since 2011, we've had a public sector spectrum release programme. I heard somebody mention, of course, we just had a mention of the release of spectrum in military use. With the aim of, we are aiming to release 500 megahertz of spectrum between 400 megahertz and 5 gigahertz from public sector use by 2020. As most of this audience, at least the UK-based amongst you, probably know very well, the next major release in this programme is of Ministry of Defence held spectrum at 2.3 gigahertz and 3.4 gigahertz. Ofcom is managing that release and will be coming forward with more detail on the release later in the year, but that's indicative of the approach that we're taking, wanting to lead the way in releasing spectrum that we don't need to be holding in the public sector and allowing that to be used for more valuable uses. But it's not the only answer. Given the increasing and competing demands for more spectrum, we need to be able to be responsive to new developments and be smarter about using what we have. That's why the spectrum strategy underlined our commitment to ensuring spectrum's available for research to stimulate innovation and growth. And in the strategy, we also envisaged that dynamic spectrum access would be a key enabler of 5G. I'm sure that doesn't come to a surprise to anybody here either. Challenge for regulators and legislators is we've traditionally designated use of spectrum as unlawful unless it's licensed or else it's unlicensed, in which case if it's unlicensed there's no protection of a service from interference, which constrains its utility. And that's for all the success that of course everybody knows about of Wi-Fi in the unlicensed space. To enable industry to exploit the potential of dynamic spectrum access requires not only a change in mindset, but in the UK at least, it requires a change in legislation. We need Ofcom to have the relevant powers so they can, for example, authorise operation of geolocation databases or the use of cognitive radio devices. Enabling these sorts of innovative uses is at the top of our list of legislative priorities for spectrum management. My team and colleagues at Ofcom are developing legislative proposals. I can't say, though, exactly when we'll be able to implement them. We are, of course, nearing the end of the time of this parliamentary session. So more sites. Despite the ingenuity of radio engineers, and it seems almost limitless, I'm constantly astonished, there is a limit to how far additional spectrum will get you, given the data demands we know about. If we're going to extend geographic coverage, which we're likely to need to do if we're going to connect more devices, then we're going to need more sites than we currently have. And we're going to need different sorts of sites, as more heterogeneous networks are deployed with a mixture of macro, micro, and small cells. And there are different regulatory challenges here. We need to ensure that it's economically viable to deploy a different mix of cells and more of them. In the UK, we made planning changes to planning legislation in summer of 2013 that makes it easier to both to deploy taller masts, slightly taller masts on this occasion, as well as deploying small cells. We continue to look at our legislation to see what more can be done to support the deployment of mobile and wireless networks. I mean, in fact, not forgetting fixed networks in this instance, looking at all aspects there. Legislation is only one lever in the hands of government. Some people would say a very blunt instrument very often. Just as important in technology policy is providing a supportive environment. Just as we have a strong record in spectrum management, the UK has a proud history of innovation in wireless technologies, right from the days when we welcomed Guillermo Marconi to these shores to pioneer radio to the present day, where academics at the University of Surrey conduct world-leading research. Companies in the Cambridge area are developing cutting-edge wireless technologies and applications. I need perhaps not to say too much about the 5G Innovation Centre, given Raheem's up next. And indeed, if I speak less, then you get to hear more of Raheem, which is always a pleasure and a good thing. Suffice to think, we think the Centre is a superb example of the collaboration we need to see between academia and industry, and we're delighted the Centre has secured more than 50 million in research funding from a range of sources, including government. I won't say any more about catapults. David has spoken about catapults. But other than to remind you that the Technology Strategy Board, which launched our catapults, is now known as Innovate UK. We mentioned the Connected Digital Economy catapult. The Future Cities catapult is also obviously massively important and interesting in these areas, helping test concepts and bring them quickly to market. And we're also supporting local enterprise partnerships to work with 5G to maximise benefits to local communities. In particular, 5GIC is working with BIS Local, that's the Department of Business Innovation and Skills Local, and LEPS in that area to stimulate links to local business. Never forget the importance of SMEs in these areas. But one of the simplest and but perhaps most powerful things that government can do in any field is to bring people together. It's remarkable what you can't do with legislation, as I'm sure that David will agree, but just bringing people together is extraordinarily powerful. So we encourage collaboration. If we're to realise the full potential claim for 5G, collaboration is the key watchword. Collaboration between governments, academia and industry. That's why we're delighted with the collaboration taking place between King's College, London, the University of Dresden, and again, University of Surrey. I think you perhaps have to count the number of times that Surrey gets name-checked today. Looking to develop a wider UK-German collaboration, because again, we, as you've heard, we see that as tremendously important. 5G IC and the 5G PPP are prime examples of partnership and collaboration in research and innovation. And of course, the WWRF. We also need to take a partnership approach to the development of public policy. And that's why a key element of our UK spectrum strategy, we established with industry the UK Spectrum Policy Forum. We set up the forum a year ago, as Julian mentioned, with our host today, Tech UK, taking a real lead and providing exceptional support for the Spectrum Policy Forum. We want the Spectrum Policy Forum to become a model of inclusive, collaborative development of public policy. I'm delighted Jim Norton, who's also here today, continues to provide thoughtful and energetic chairmanship of the forum. I wouldn't be a government official if I didn't have something to plug. So a bit like somebody on a chat show plugging our latest book. One final thing that government can do is to provide vision and direction. As I mentioned earlier, technological development and deployment of a new generation of mobile tech doesn't happen overnight. Given the length of time needed, the significant investment required, you need to know that the government supports and will facilitate your efforts over the medium to long term. And that's why we're developing a long-term view of the infrastructure the UK will need in 10 to 15 years' time, based not so much on the technological art of the possible, but on the best informed view we can manage of what people, businesses and governments will actually need to use that infrastructure for. We are currently seeking inputs through a public consultation to the development of our digital communications infrastructure strategy. Consultation asks quite a large number of questions about communications technologies and how investment can be supported. The consultation closes on the 1st of October, so there's still time to get your responses in. And Mark Swarbrick, who is leading that team in my areas of responsibility, is amongst us today and hopefully much of tomorrow, so he's looking forward to the conversations he'll have with all of you. We're not starting from a point of view of a preferred option or outcome, it's a genuine consultation. But I don't think I'm giving anything away when I say that, given the time frame we're looking at, the development and deployment of 5G services will be a key element of our thinking. So let me conclude. The UK government sees wireless technology as a critical enabler of growth and productivity, as well as the means by which key public services are increasingly being delivered. We want the UK to be at the forefront of the development of wireless technology and especially 5G. To that end, we're trying to ensure that our policy and legislation provides the best possible environment for development of 5G. That means examining our legislation and changing some things to support innovation. It means providing centres of excellence, such as the catapults, where business can find the funding, facilities and support they need to thrive. And it means providing policy leadership developed and communicated through organisations like the UK Spectrum Policy Forum and through events like this one. Thank you very much for having me.